Inside ADX Florence Supermax, world's deadliest inmates and gang secrets exposed. The prison built to break men. Subscribe now, because once you step inside these walls, there's no turning back. It was just after midnight when the black convoy rolled through the Colorado wilderness, headlights cutting across the barren desert landscape. A line of armored SUVs escorted a single prison transport bus, its reinforced windows darkened, its passengers shackled at wrists and ankles. The convoy's destination was Florence, a quiet town in Fremont County, a town that outsiders barely noticed, except for one thing: it was home to the most secure prison in the United States. ADX Florence. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, ADX isn't just a prison. It's a fortress carved into the high desert, ringed by razor wire, gun towers, and motion sensors buried deep into the ground. Here, inmates don't just lose their freedom, they lose the outside world. Concrete replaces sky. Silence replaces voices. And time itself seems to stop. Inside that midnight convoy sat some of the most dangerous men America has ever known. One of them was a cartel boss whose name sparked fear on both sides of the border. Another was a terrorist whose actions had left cities scarred forever. They were being delivered into cells designed not only to hold them, but to slowly break them. Prison officials call it administrative segregation. Former wardens have used another phrase: a clean version of hell. The arrival. The bus hissed to a stop at the Sally Port, a steel-walled chamber where guards check, recheck, and lock down every vehicle before it enters. As the inmates stepped off, chains clinking, their eyes darted to the concrete towers that loomed overhead. No one escapes from ADX Florence. Not even the thought of escape survives here. One of the new arrivals was Rafael El Tigre Montoya, a fictionalized composite drawn from real cartel bosses who have passed through these gates. His empire had stretched from Juarez to Los Angeles, and he'd ordered more killings than he could count. Now, he was just another number. He was led down a corridor so narrow it felt like a tomb. Guards in black tactical gear flanked him, each carrying batons, pepper spray, and rifles. The sound of his chains echoed against the concrete walls. At the end of the hall, a heavy steel door slid open. Inside waited the cell that would be his world for the next several decades. 7 feet wide, 12 feet long. A concrete bed. A steel sink. A slot in the door where food trays would slide through. A narrow slit of a window, angled so that the only view was a slice of sky, never the mountains, never the horizon. Montoya's first words in the cell weren't recorded. But another inmate, years later, described his own first night here. It felt like being buried alive, except you were still breathing. The history of isolation. ADX Florence opened in 1994, at the height of America's war on drugs and terror. The federal government needed a place for inmates who were considered too dangerous even for other maximum security prisons. The Supermax model was born. Here, prisoners spend 23 hours a day locked in solitary. Recreation, if granted, means 1 hour in an outdoor cage barely larger than the cell itself. No contact with other inmates. No programs. No jobs. No visits beyond a screen. Guards monitor every movement through cameras and reinforced glass. The philosophy is simple: cut off the gang leaders, the terrorists, the serial killers from any chance of influence. If they cannot communicate, they cannot command. But over the years, psychologists have warned that the real effect is psychological torture, hallucinations, paranoia, and a slow deterioration of the human mind. One former warden admitted in an interview, "We don't just lock you up here. We erase you." A cell block of legends. Montoya wasn't alone. Just down the tier, another inmate sat in his own concrete cage, Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber. In another wing was Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Years later, Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán would join them, after his dramatic capture and extradition from Mexico. The prison reads like a who's who of America's most feared names. Whitey Bulger, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, members of Al-Qaeda, leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, cartel bosses from Mexico, each one isolated, each one silenced. Yet, inside those walls, rumors still spread, whispers of coded messages, of smuggled notes, of guards pressured or bribed. Even in the world's tightest prison, secrets find ways to move. The first breach of silence. 2 months into Montoya's sentence, a guard noticed something unusual. During routine rounds, he found a scrap of paper lodged under the steel sink. On it was a crude drawing, lines, arrows, symbols. It didn't look like much, but intelligence officers recognized it immediately. It was a map of the cell block, drawn by memory and desperation. How could Montoya, locked in 23-hour isolation, with no contact, sketch this? And more importantly, who was it for? The discovery set off alarms all the way to Washington. If gang leaders were communicating inside ADX Florence, it meant the fortress wasn't airtight. It meant the most dangerous men in America still had a voice, and someone, somewhere, was listening. That single scrap of paper would lead investigators to uncover something far bigger than one inmate's defiance. It hinted at a network, a hidden chain of communication, and the possibility that even from inside the world's toughest prison, orders were being sent to the outside. But the real shock came weeks later, when another guard went missing. His body wasn't found in the prison. It was found 40 miles away, dumped in a canyon. And inside his jacket pocket was another map. The guard's body in the canyon. The call came in at dawn. A hiker in the San Isabel National Forest had stumbled upon something grotesque, a body wedged between jagged rocks at the bottom of a narrow canyon. The man was dressed in civilian clothes, but his badge, still clipped to his belt, told a different story. He was a correctional officer from ADX Florence. His name was Michael Lawson. His face was battered, his ribs cracked, his throat bruised. But it was what the deputies found in his jacket that chilled them, a folded piece of prison-issue paper. On it, another crude drawing, eerily similar to the map discovered weeks earlier inside Montoya's cell. The FBI was called before sunrise. By noon, federal agents were swarming the canyon. By nightfall, a task force had been formed. Lawson's murder wasn't just a crime, it was a message. The investigation begins. The task force set up headquarters inside the prison itself, converting a conference room into a war room. Photographs of the maps were pinned to a board. Names of inmates known for cartel ties were scrawled in red marker. Warden Frank Hughes, a man with 30 years in corrections, addressed the agents bluntly. If Montoya is behind this, then ADX Florence has been compromised. And if ADX is compromised, the entire system is in danger. The agents began piecing together timelines. Lawson had been a guard at Florence for 6 years. He wasn't known for disciplinary problems. No gambling debt. No visible addictions. But a quiet review of his finances revealed something suspicious. Unexplained cash deposits, small at first, then growing larger in the months before his death. Had Lawson been bribed? Or was he being blackmailed? Either way, it raised the most dangerous question imaginable. Were the deadliest inmates in America finding ways to control the very men assigned to keep them locked down? Inside the cell. Meanwhile, Montoya remained silent. Day after day, he sat inside his cell, staring at the slice of sky his narrow window allowed him. Guards recorded every move, every glance. They swore he didn't speak a word to anyone. But intelligence officers knew better. In Pelican Bay, gang bosses had used hand signals, hidden notes, even coded chess games to pass orders. At ADX Florence, with its layers of isolation, that should have been impossible. Yet somehow, messages were moving. One clue came from another inmate, locked in the same tier. A former Aryan Brotherhood hitman named Dalton Red McVeigh, a composite inspired by real AB members. He told investigators he'd seen Montoya pressing his ear against the air vent for hours at a time. "You think these walls stop sound?" he sneered. "Air moves. Voices move with it. You just gotta know how to listen." The agents realized something terrifying. The very design of the prison, with its intricate ventilation systems, might be a hidden weakness. Inmates were using the vents like telephones, whispering messages cell to cell, wing to wing. The web unfolds. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a chilling pattern. Over the past 3 months, 3 cartel murders had taken place on the outside, all of them mirroring instructions found in notes smuggled from Pelican Bay years earlier. Now, similar coded messages were appearing in Florence. Was Montoya continuing to run his empire from within the fortress? And if so, who was helping him? The FBI intercepted a letter mailed from another inmate's legal correspondence. At first glance, it looked like a routine appeal. But hidden in the margins were faint pencil marks, dots and dashes forming coded instructions. When decrypted, they matched the same style of orders issued by Montoya's cartel on the street. The fortress wasn't silent. It was leaking. The second death. Just as agents prepared to tighten surveillance, another shock hit the prison. A kitchen worker, a civilian contractor, collapsed during his shift. At first, it seemed like a heart attack, but the autopsy revealed traces of ricin in his bloodstream. Ricin, a deadly toxin lethal even in small doses. How could a prisoner in solitary confinement possibly obtain or manufacture such a substance? The answer was even more unsettling. Someone on the outside had slipped it in. And hidden in the kitchen worker's locker, investigators found an envelope. Inside was another map. This time, it wasn't of the prison. It was of the canyon where Lawson's body had been found. The prison in panic. Rumors swept the facility. Guards grew paranoid, double-checking every tray of food, every supply shipment. Inmates tapped messages into the walls at night, their rhythms echoing through the blocks like a secret code. Warden Hughes called an emergency meeting with the FBI. His words were blunt. If Montoya is controlling his network from inside this place, then ADX Florence is no longer the most secure prison in America. It's the most dangerous. The FBI knew they were running out of time. Someone was leaking information. Someone was dying every 2 weeks. And if the pattern continued, the next target could be one of their own agents. Late one night, an FBI agent assigned to the case was driving back from the prison when his headlights caught something strange on the deserted road. A black SUV pulled off to the side, engine running, hazard lights flashing. Inside, slumped over the steering wheel, was another guard. His throat had been cut. On the passenger seat lay a folded piece of paper. This time, the map wasn't of the prison. It was of Washington, D.C. Voices through the vent. The discovery of the Washington, D.C. map changed everything. What had started as a contained prison investigation now carried the stench of a national threat. If Montoya's influence had already reached beyond Colorado, it could stretch anywhere, even into the political heart of the country. The FBI task force was split in two. One team remained embedded in Florence, scrutinizing every detail of inmate communications, while another was dispatched to D.C., quietly alerting federal agencies to the possibility of a coordinated strike. But no one knew how the orders were traveling. No phones. No visits. Every letter screened. Every call monitored. And yet, messages were moving like smoke through cracks. The language of silence an engineer brought in to study the prison's infrastructure confirmed the suspicion. The ventilation system was not airtight. When inmates pressed their mouths against the steel grates, faint whispers could travel cell to cell. The sound was muffled, almost indistinguishable, but with practice, a code could be developed. Investigators called it the language of silence. Montoya wasn't speaking in full sentences. He was tapping, whispering, humming in tones that only someone trained could decipher. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mafia, even jihadist inmates, each had their own codes. And inside Florence, these worlds overlapped in terrifying ways. The FBI realized something more chilling. Montoya wasn't just communicating. He was recruiting. The betrayal within. While surveillance ramped up inside the prison, the agents stationed in D.C. hit their first wall. The map left in the murdered guard's car showed landmarks, federal buildings, government offices, but it wasn't precise. It looked more like a warning than a plan. Then came the real blow. A classified report leaked. Sensitive details about the Florence investigation appeared on the dark web, buried in cartel forums and encrypted chat rooms. The leak was traced not to inmates, not to guards, but to someone inside the FBI task force itself. The betrayal cut deep. Now the agents weren't just hunting Montoya, they were hunting a traitor in their own ranks. Montoya's shadow inside ADX, Montoya remained calm. Guards described him as almost serene, sitting cross-legged on the concrete bed, his gaze fixed on the narrow slit of sky. But his calmness was more terrifying than rage. It was the calm of a man who knew he was still in control. Every time investigators intercepted one coded message, another slipped past. One agent described it like trying to plug holes in a dam with your fingers while the water just keeps rising. And then came the most unsettling discovery yet. Montoya wasn't acting alone. He was coordinating with at least 3 other high-profile inmates, each one representing a different criminal network. Together, they formed what investigators began calling the Vent Syndicate. The prisoner who talked. Desperate for answers, the FBI turned to an unlikely source. Dalton Red McVeigh, the Aryan Brotherhood enforcer who had hinted at the Vent Code. He offered them a deal. Protection, better conditions, maybe even a transfer out of ADX. In exchange, he'd reveal how the syndicate operated. McVeigh leaned in close to the glass during his debrief, his voice low, his eyes bloodshot. You think Montoya's trapped in here? You're wrong. This whole place, it's his fortress. He doesn't need to get out. He's making the world come in. McVeigh explained that messages weren't only passed through Vent. They were hidden in legal mail, coded into Bible verses, even scratched into the backs of food trays. Guards too afraid or too greedy looked the other way. A network of silence and complicity kept the machine running. And Lawson, the dead guard, hadn't just been a mule. He'd been a loyalist, until he wasn't. Escalating threats. The ricin killing of the kitchen worker had already shaken the prison. But when a second civilian contractor was hospitalized from poisoning, panic spread beyond the walls. Family members of guards demanded answers. Politicians in Denver called for a full-scale federal intervention. The FBI's fear was simple. If Montoya could kill from inside Florence, what stopped him from reaching Washington? And then, in the middle of a stormy night, an encrypted message appeared in one of the cartel's online channels. It contained just one line: "The Rockies are just the beginning." 2 days later, a small package arrived at an office in Washington, D.C. It bore no return address. Security officers intercepted it before it reached its intended recipient, a federal judge known for handing down maximum cartel sentences. Inside the package was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a map this time. It was a key. A hand-forged replica of an ADX Florence cell key. The fortress cracks. The forged cell key sent shockwaves through Washington. ADX Florence was supposed to be impenetrable, its locks engineered to resist any replication. Yet here it was, a near-perfect copy. If Montoya's people could smuggle out a blueprint for a key, what else had already left the fortress? The FBI task force doubled their manpower. Guards were interrogated, wings were searched, and mailrooms were torn apart. But no one could answer the question gnawing at everyone's mind: was the key a threat or a promise? The traitor unmasked. Weeks of surveillance finally paid off. One of the agents embedded in the task force, Special Agent Marcus Hale, was caught making a late-night call from a burner phone. When confronted, Hale tried to bluff. But the evidence was clear: encrypted transfers, unexplained cash deposits, and dark web logins that matched the leak. The betrayal cut to the bone. A man sworn to protect the country had been feeding Montoya's cartel for months. But even as Hale was dragged away in handcuffs, he left investigators with a chilling message. You think you've stopped him? Montoya doesn't need to escape. He already has. The master plan. Piecing together the maps, the codes, and the messages hidden in food trays, the FBI realized the terrifying scope of Montoya's plan. It wasn't about escaping ADX Florence. It was about proving that even from the most secure prison in America, he could orchestrate murders, poisonings, and leaks at will. It was psychological warfare, a demonstration to his cartel that loyalty would be rewarded and betrayal punished, no matter the walls in between. The body of Guard Lawson? A message. The Ricin deaths? A warning. The D.C. map? A flex of power. And the forged key? A symbol. Montoya had turned the fortress into a stage, and the world was his audience. The final confrontation. The FBI decided to cut off the head of the snake. Montoya was moved to a black site within the prison, a deeper wing known as Range 13, built for total sensory deprivation. No vents. No contact. Just solid walls of reinforced steel. The transfer took place under blackout conditions. Armed guards escorted him through a maze of corridors, each door locking behind them. But as Montoya was led away, he smiled. A thin, almost imperceptible grin that unsettled even the hardest guards. You're too late, he whispered. The words echoed long after the cell door slammed shut. The twist. 2 weeks later, coordinated raids struck cartel safehouses in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston. But instead of chaos, agents found order. New leaders had already been appointed. Operations continued smoothly, almost as if Montoya had planned his own silencing. And in a chilling discovery, investigators uncovered dozens of forged ADX keys hidden in cartel warehouses across the country. Each key a replica. Each one stamped with the same tiny engraving, Tigre. Montoya hadn't needed to leave Florence. He had ensured Florence left with him. The aftermath. Publicly, officials claimed the situation was contained. The FBI never disclosed the full extent of the leak. ADX Florence remained open, its reputation intact. But those who worked the case knew the truth. The Alcatraz of the Rockies had cracked. The fortress meant to silence the deadliest men in America had become their loudest microphone. To this day, guards still talk about Montoya's smile. How he looked up at that narrow slit of sky, calm and unbroken, as if he knew he had already won. Some believe the vent syndicate still operates, whispers flowing through Florence's concrete lungs. And every now and then, a new message surfaces. A note. A symbol. A map. Proof that even in the world's most secure prison, silence is an illusion. Think this story was intense? You're not ready for the next one. Subscribe, and step deeper inside the darkness.